So there's a lot of different op case positions, right? So help me name them. K, kind of plan. What else?
DA.
Nice. Anything else?
Theory.
There we go.
Procedurals.
I'm just going to put procedurals. And under there, I'm going to put T, right? So that's pretty much fun. Anything else?
I mean, you can run case turns on separate sheets, but they're
Yeah.
mini DAs.
So like on case is something that off case or ops should prep. Sorry. Lovely. So let's just go in the order of what happens when you get an op. So you get a topic, right? And you get 20 minutes to prep. So the first piece of advice I always have is, oh shit, take 20 seconds, right? So just freaking out about the topic and trying to, that's always an unproductive strategy. It's like, what is this? What's going on? So I think something that's really helpful that my partner and I did quite often was we would divide up some duties. And we would kind of figure out what we already understood about the topic, what we had already prepped before the tournament had started. And then after we kind of have that conversation, we could immediately start breaking down some work and getting things done. So something that's really helpful for oppositions is to prep a lot of things, right? Because then if they do something squirrely, you have something that you could also run. So a lot of teams like to prep a critique and a disad and a counter plan. And then depending on what the other team does, they'll put 2 sheets aside and they'll run 1 position, right? Or they'll prep a topicality in case of, and it doesn't link, then they'll just not use it. So sometimes it's helpful to have a lot of different arguments that are prepped. And the best way to do that is to really get on the same level as your partner, right? So that you guys both know what you enjoy, what you're good at, and what you guys can produce within 20 minutes. So in saying such, yeah, oh shit takes like 10 seconds. It's always, it's never fun trying to figure out what the topic is and what you want to do as a strategy. I think it just wastes a lot of time arguing back and forth with the partner, trying to figure out what you should all run. I think it's helpful just to do some research and to start writing, right? That's going to be more helpful than in 5 minutes, so we got to have something. Like, let's figure out something. On top of that, and this is something a lot of teams do, is they produce positions that they kind of fall back on, right? So like some teams, they run Nietzsche, they have nothing else to do, and they have it memorized. And that's somewhat of a good idea, and that's something that I know happens a lot in Open, is that they have certain pet arguments that they have so well developed and so well memorized that it doesn't matter if they're not flowed, right? It doesn't matter if they're not on a sheet, because the partner knows, they know it by heart, and all of a sudden if you get hit with something kind of wanky and janky, you can at least have something to argue instead of just having 20 minutes of useless prep. So that's always kind of helpful too. It's kind of like read the news, figure out positions that you're big fans of. Like we always like cap Ks because they're really easy to just memorize a cap K and somebody's in capitalism, and you'll at least have an argument from the get-go. But from that, we can break down each one of these positions. So let's do disads first. And everybody does positions differently, so this is the way I've always been taught, and it comes with different parts, right? So there's uniqueness, link, internal link, brink, which really doesn't get talked about very much anymore, but it's still a very important thing, and an impact, right? Those are the parts of a disadvantage. I like this picture because I'm a terrible artist. Yeah, let's draw some spikes and a snake. Yeah. And we'll put our dude up here. Right? This is a disad. That sounds so stupid, but this is a picture of a disad. The uniqueness is this picture, right? There's a man, he's about ready to fall off the hill. The economy sucks, right? It's a picture of the status quo. It's an explanation of what's going on. The link is this movement, right? Like, he's really close to the edge, he falls off the cliff. So economy sucks, your plan spends more money, he falls off the edge. The internal link is this direction. Like spending too much money and not having money causes deficit spending. Deficit spending causes economic collapse, and this is the impact, right? Does that make sense? So hopefully this isn't a terrible picture, but it kind of illustrates some other arguments afterward. So uniqueness is really just a picture of the squo. A link is how plan causes action. The internal link is how that action relates to an impact. The brink would be him falling off the cliff. Like, this is the brink. And sometimes, like, for example, like there's a child prostitution act, and the brink is 72 hours. So if you're a minor and you're homeless, the brink of somebody turning to prostitution is 72 hours, right? That's when the impact is triggered. Or you could have another brink on like a spending disadvantage, like $1,000 puts us over the edge. That's the brink to what causes this action to go off the cliff and cause an impact, right? And then the impact is something that's really bad. Brink is the key, like requirement or whatever, the threshold, essentially.
The trigger.
Yeah. I like threshold. Impact is bad thing. So let's actually just like produce something that looks like a disadvantage. So like let's do spending because that's really easy. So uniqueness, economy is awesome now, right? Now your warrants, like things you need to fill in, is the explanation to what makes that true, what gives claim weight. So like my favorite ones for economy is probably the Case-Shiller Index, which is like a collection of the top 25 real estate markets. And you explain, like, real estate's really important to the United States, right? Like, we buy houses here. If the real estate market is doing well, then that means the economy is probably doing well, right? So you explain your status, picture the status quo. Link is plan, spend, money, right? Their plan causes some action. The internal link is spending money equals deficit spending. And you can continue to like, I mean, you don't need just one uniqueness point, one link point, one internal link point. I mean, we're just kind of doing this kind of basic. But I mean, on top of your uniqueness, you can be like, look, the economy's awesome because unemployment's down. The economy's awesome because GDP's up. The economy's awesome because the stock market looks great. The economy's awesome because of the Case-Shiller Index. You can give all these different warrants and explanations as to why the status quo is doing awesome, right? I personally, and I think it's a really good idea, is to paint the picture as bleak as possible. Because any risk that they cause the link means you save this uniqueness scenario. So if you're like, oh, not only is there like, spikes and a snake, but there's also fire and he's naked, then it's going to make, your impact really, really large. It makes it so that any kind of action triggers a risk, some impact would occur. Cool. Internally, sometimes you don't need a break. Like, we could do a break for some spending disadvantage, which would be, let's say it's $1,000. So $1,000 is how much money we have. We spend 1,001. We're going to cause some impact, right? And that impact's going to be like econ collapse. And then people talk about terminal and linear impacts, right? So do we know the difference? Linear impacts is like for every dollar spent, you get $2 back, right? So it looks like the linear impact, right? For every one person that is murdered, more corruption. For every one tree that goes down, less CO2 comes out of the atmosphere. Terminal impacts, or things that are a flashpoint or something along those lines, can be like nuclear war or like extinction. It's some really large event or really large impact that doesn't happen on some linear scale where as you continue to do more and more things it gets worse. It's just something really, really bad. So you can do econ collapse causes global econ collapse. And then, like every debater, that causes nuclear war, right? That's like a really, really basic disad. From this, and I know this is the op lecture, but I think this is also pretty helpful, is the answers people have to these positions, right? So some people say, like on a disad, and these are the responses, and these are things to help prep is what the answers to these positions are. So a very, very common one is non-unique. Like he isn't always on this cliff. This guy, the economy's always been awesome, right? Your disad is non-unique. This guy is always going to be on this edge. Or they make the argument that uniqueness overwhelms the link. That this picture of the status quo is always looking like this, that the link doesn't trigger this guy to go over the edge, right? Other arguments are like a link turn. So like what the PMC says or the MG says back to you is, we don't push this guy over the edge, instead we push him back. That's a link turn, right? That's offense, because now instead of us going off the cliff, we saved this guy. We're pushing him farther back, and that's what the MG usually tries to say is link turn, right? Instead of plan spending money, it's plan saves money. So you really want to make sure your arguments are tailored to answer back what MGs like to say. And a lot of MGs I'm sure you've heard like offense. Offense wins debate rounds, right? Those are offensive arguments because there's a opportunity cost to not doing the plan. Because if the plan is going to save this dude, then that's probably helpful, right? Other arguments is like, we don't link, right? So we're not going to push him off the cliff, or the wind's going to push him off the cliff, or, he doesn't, this isn't a cliff, it's actually just like a small ledge. Like, those are like defensive arguments. Internally, it's the opposite thing. So if it's spending money equals deficit spending, they would make the argument that spending money, saves money, right? So instead of it going downwards, it's the same thing. It now goes upwards. That's offense. Impact. A lot of people like to impact turn dissets. So if our thing is economic collapse is bad, the MG's response is economic collapse is good, right? So they're saying, look, yeah, he's on the cliff, and yeah, we push him off, and yeah, he falls, but him falling is a great thing, right? Like, economic collapse is probably helpful for a lot of different reasons, like, we don't,
systemic changes.
Yeah, systemic changes, like, it causes social protests, like, war's been a great thing in Africa. It's helped collectivize certain groups, it's allowed for populations to extract taxes, it's allowed for a collectivization of the military. These are called impact turns, right? That's something a lot of teams like to do, is they like to turn the impact, or they like to turn the link. If you're on the op side, if people ever do both, then it's called a double turn. So they say, look, we saved this guy, he's not going to fall off, but even if he does, it's a good thing, right? That's a contradictory argument. That's really good to point out as the op team is like, look, they're making multiple claims on one sheet of paper that contradict one another. And so a good way of getting out of that piece of paper is extend them both and not go for it. Because a very, very big important thing on the opposition side, and some really good advice, is you should know walking into the round what you want to win, right? Like, what position, what argument do we need to win in order to get the W in this round? And so I think a lot of teams kind of understand that, and they're like, look, we're going to go for this disad. We're going to run 2 other disads that are just going to be time sucks, and we're really going to go for this position. So as an opposition team, it's kind of helpful to realize, like, oh, we're a K team, so we're going to run topicality. They're going to spend a lot of time on topicality, but we're really going to go for the critique. And you want to open up that position for the MO out of the LOC speech, right? So the first person that's an opposition speaker, they kind of have to have that strategy, and they're the ones that kind of set the tone for the debate. But the MO then needs kind of that access to these kind of arguments, and it's all collapsing and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, that's a disad. Are there any questions? There's multiple different forms of disads. Like, most of them are either terminalized or they're linear. I think linear disads are kind of weak, but sometimes they're really helpful if you have like a counter plan. So look, you save $1 and you gain $2, but which one can you weigh? Like, nuclear war that causes extinction, or you're saving $2 for every dollar you spend? Like, as a judge, one of them has more magnitude than the other. So as an opposition team, again, it's all about how you want to frame the round. So if you understand that concept, then you can be like, look, we're going to win this argument that you should prioritize systemic impacts over like flashpoint impacts. Things that are for sure going to happen, the probability is extremely high, and the time frame is immediate. It's probably going to be maybe, the judge will be more persuaded than some far-fetched nuclear war scenario with like Mexico, right? So it's all about like that strategy or the prioritization. So that's a disad. Is that cool? Sweet. Now I'm going to erase this dude.
Do you guys have any questions about anything? I know that was
lots.
Quick. That's a lot of information. Does the warrants stuff make sense?
So my issue with warrants is like finding them in prep time, just like not having enough like prep coming in to be like searching Google and be like, oh
yeah. And some of the best ways to mitigate that are to like break down topic areas amongst even you and your partner or even your team, and write some briefs, even going into the tournament. The week before the tournament, look up stats on the economy, look at like GDP growth, look at the Case-Shiller index, like you said, like for that week. And that way you have a backup of it and you can just go and look it up. Like that's why briefs are super, super helpful.
Because in novice and JV, a lot of the times, like as a critic, I get just claims that your coach or your teammates have fed, right? Yeah. And you don't understand the arguments necessarily. And so some of the best things you can do is just figure out, what makes sense about this. Like, why is it that when borders are porous, violence occurs? Like, what example could we think of? Afghanistan, maybe. With the Afghanistan war, the borders are really porous, people cross easily, and that causes violence. That's all you have to say. That's the warrant that explains your claim. It's called the Toulmin's model of argumentation. And it goes claim, warrant, data, impact. So claim, econ, up, warrant is the explanation. It's what gives this weight and validity. And so like we've already talked about some, right? Like GDP.
Was up 4% in the last quarter.
Unemployment. And then you can really, really get specific warrants, like why is unemployment the best indicator for the economy? Because they might say, no, the economy actually sucks. Look at these other like numbers. Look at like China's GDP, it's slowing down. Look at the world's economy, it's slowing down. Look at this random think tank that says something. A good warrant or a good debater is like, look, our warrant is better than your warrant. Our explanation to why the economy is doing well is better than your obscure source that doesn't have that straight, reflection of how the economy is doing. It's like, we are built on houses here in the United States. And so the Case-Shiller Index might be the best warrant to explain how the economy is going. Like the 2008 financial crisis was caused by real estate. If that means it's doing well, that means the economy is probably doing well. So, those are your warrants, is that explanation, that data that gives this nebulous claim, like the economy's up. It gives it, its own blah, 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 blah. The data is like the unemployment stat, so it's at 8.9%, right? Or like GDP's up 2%. Like, that's the data that fills in the warrant, but the warrant is the explanation as to why this claim is true and why the judge should care. And then the impact tends to be, what econ's up, what does that mean? If the economy's up, then maybe there's not tests. Maybe that's the terminal impact for your disad. But that's the Tolman's model, and that's something else, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So next thing, probably, we did disads. Let's do critiques, because that's my favorite. Well, first off, I really like to draw. So here we got a fact. Here we have a value. And then here we have a policy. Has anybody heard of trichotomy?
Yep.
Yeah. This is essentially what tricot is. It says that debate happens in 3 different realms, right? The fact is the word is usually. The value is the word ought, not always, but mostly. And policy tends to be the word should. And these have a very intricate relationship with one another, right? So a resolution of fact would be abortion is wrong. It's just a statement. It's true or false, right? A value would be we ought to value life because abortion is wrong. It encompasses facts that then, entertain or motivate or inculcate some value. And then a policy is like the United States federal government should substantially decrease funding to abortion. As you can see, that policy encompasses all 3. So in the realm of critiques, you tend to debate, oh my gosh, well, give me some bullseyes. This is the assumption, this is the argument, and this is the debater. So critiques function on both these bullseyes, right? And a lot of things function on both these bullseyes. The disads tend to be in this policy realm, right? To making value claims on facts. Critiques go for 2 things in particular. They tend to go for the value claims, right? Like what you're assuming, what you value implicitly is wrong, or it causes some bad impact. And that goes to the heart of like the things you can argue back, right? So you can argue the assumptions somebody makes. You can argue back the argument somebody makes, or you can argue the debater himself. Right? So you could say, like, don't listen to that person because of their skin color. Or don't listen to that person because they don't have a degree. That's a really, really bad argument, right? Ad hominem, it's superficial, it's on the very, very end. A really, really good argument is like they say econ's up, you say econ's bad, right? Or econ down. That's like straight clash, back and forth. Debating the assumption would be like, who cares about the economy? Like the economy itself as an institution is fundamentally wrong. See how that kind of relates to capitalism? Like that's a critique because it goes right for the assumptions that inform the debater's arguments. Right? So critiques function on the assumption level, and they function on the value level. So that's all that. So as a critique, you got 4 parts. Do we remember all of them? Framework,
links, impacts, alt, solvency,
implications, alt, and then alt solvency. So I guess there's more of them. I can't count. That's why I'm in debate and did political science. So yeah, these are the main parts of a critique. This isn't always needed, framework. And I kind of evaluate framework like a pair of glasses, right? You put on like sunglasses and the whole world looks differently. Right? So if we have some framework about a cap K that says Like, your value to life depends on your access to means of production. So this is making some back claim that people's value to life is only contingent on how well they can access different means of production, right? So you frame the world, you put on essentially a pair of glasses that says, all things are true via this statement, right? Like, all things can be viewed through these types of arguments. Or like epistemology is another framework people tend to argue, which is like, knowledge is power, bad knowledge is bad power, right? So that would be some framework claim that frames the world in such a way that now the debate is different. Instead of like worrying about net benefits, we're looking at knowledge and what informs our assumptions and what we come to understand as education, blah, 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 blah. So links would be how the debater links to some assumption that you're making, right? You link to capitalism. And why do you link to capitalism? You can get some really shoddy ones like, you go to school, right? Go to school. Or you spend money. Or you use the USFG, right? So if we're criticizing the institution of the state, like in general, like states are bad, then anybody who uses the state links to some criticism. The impact is, or the implications are the negative things that happen. So capitalism equals extinction, right? Finite amount of resources, infinite growth assumption is how capitalism operates. And that logic results in extinction. Like, look at how many species have died. Look at how many trees have come down, blah, 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 blah. So your implications are the weight as to why that assumption, the value claims they're making, is fundamentally wrong. The alt is what solves for this whole argument. So like the alt could be, reject vote off and some symbolic blah, 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 blah in support of, Marxist ideology. And all of a sudden, this alternative, this statement, which is very much like a plan, is supposed to solve back the links and the implications, right? So this alt claim of like rejecting capitalism solves for the extinction that's inevitable if you vote for the act. So you want your alt to solve the implications, and usually you want it to solve the PMC. So when you begin your op case positions, it's really smart to think about what they're going to do, right? So if they're going to argue econ as an advantage, because the topic's all about spending or about alternative energy or something like that, then flowing out some cap K might be a good idea because you're for sure going to link them to it, right? And if you can make your implication solve back to the PMC, then all of a sudden the critique that you prepped becomes a prereq to the PMC. So in order to get anything the app wants, you have to first get rid of capitalism to solve back for their economic scenario, blah, 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 blah. The alt is how this statement, this plan text, whatever it is, solves back for those issues. So like reject, like we usually use reject, pretty popular. So like reject equals open space equals dissonance equals deconstruction, and decon solves. So I tend to I'm a logic hound. So I think it's really helpful, and I think judges really like it if you have global claims. So as an opposition, it's really easy to make, a five-word statement instead of some 30-word statement trying to explain, because, you can't flow 30 words very fast. And a lot of people make, big bullshit words and trying to make things really confusing. I think it's really easy if you kind of frame everything as in A to B, B to C, C to D, and D's back, right? That makes it really easy to argue any of these positions. Disads, critiques, counterplans, everything. So this would be how the alt solves, right? Your alt text has the word reject. Reject creates some open space in this debate world. That open space allows us to be dissonant, create some open gap where we're not, consumed in some ideology. That dissonance allows us to deconstruct those ideologies, and deconstruction solves. See how that's all kind of fit together as a clean package that relates to this, which relates to this, which relates to this. That's really the key thing when it comes to oppositions, is making sure your story is cogent, that everything makes sense together, that there's not random nebulous information in there that isn't, going to be helpful. You only have so much time in a debate round, so it's really helpful to make sure that every word you're using has some impact, that has some reason that it's being said. So yeah, that's pretty much a critique. I don't know if we want to get super complicated. You can do alts that are counterplans, which is kind of fun. So all of a sudden, the way to solve the critique is a counterplan. And there's a net benefit to doing the counterplans. Because not only do you solve for the K, but you get some other like awesome benefits. So like, the alt could be the United States federal government will spend $10 trillion. That would probably collapse the economy or cause some pretty bad inflation. And then all of a sudden you would solve for capitalism because collapsing the economy is probably a good thing if you're a Marxist, right? So like, okay, yeah. Then you get a fiat and you do some other cool stuff. That's a critique. Are there any questions on critiques? Hopefully we're not going too fast, or hopefully this is helpful. Yeah? Okay.
If you have questions, you guys can totally.
Yeah, basic structure is fine.
It's the
nuances.
It's the nuances?
A little bit. I mean, I did a full year of high school.
Yeah, something like this is all probably just a rehash.
Which is a good thing.
Novice, who've never done debate before. Cool.
Well,
yeah.
Very cool.
That's good. Super cool.
Yeah, so that's critique. Framework is like classes. Link is how they result in some assumption or value claim. The implication is the negative impact that happens from those value claims or those assumptions. The alt is how you solve for all these things. It's the alternative world. It's a new way of accessing some way to combat these assumptions, or it's a new insertion of a value claim, right? Because if we're rejecting capitalism, in rejecting something, we're affirming something else, right? By rejecting cap, we're probably affirming Marxism. So you're really, critiques function on the assumption level and the value level, and the alt is a new insertion of an assumption and a value. So that's really where your impacts come from, your links come from, blah, 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 blah. Sweet, good. Okay. What else we got? Sweet, next up is procedurals. So let's see, and pretty much all procedurals are the same, and that includes like totality. So there's interpretation, a violation, standards, and voters. So an interpretation is a statement, right? So should equals policy. Or what would be another good interpretation? Like, you can't read a counterplan in the last minute. So these are two different types, right? This is topicality. My handwriting sucks, I'm sorry. And this is just a procedural page. So you have an interpretation. If the word is should, it denotes a policy resolution. Or if you read a counterplan in the last minute, that's probably bad, right? They just did that as the op, or as the gov, and so you as the opposition are interpreting that you shouldn't be able to read a counterplan in the last minute. The way I always think about procedurals is kind of like a chess game, right? So when you play chess, like the knight has an assigned role, right? It goes 2 over and then 1 to either way. Or like the rook only goes straight. What procedurals do is they challenge the rules. It says, look, there's a new way of playing this game, but the way you're playing the game is unfair or uneducational. The word choice you're using or the way that you're conducting your debate is problematic, right? The way you moved that rook is wrong. The violation is what they did, right? So you read a counterplan with 45 seconds left. So that's the violation. That's what the team just did that violated this interpretation. Or they did should and they ran it as a value. That would be the violation on like a T-show. Standards are why your interpretation is better than what they have just done. So some really common ones are like ground. Like, how are you supposed to generate any ground if they read a counterplan in the last 45 seconds? It's really hard, there's so many things to do to a counterplan that it's not fair if teams do things, or they don't answer a question, right? So you've had your hand up for 8 minutes or 7 minutes trying to ask the PM a freaking question, and they don't answer one. So you get up and you say, interpretation, you should answer a question. Violation, you didn't answer a question. Standards, ground, we can't hold you to anything because you won't answer a fucking question. Right? Education. You're being uneducational because you won't answer our question. We don't know what you're talking about. Voters, this is probably abusive and unfair. And fairness is the internal link to debate, and you ruin that, so vote them down. Right? You're really just challenging the way that they've engaged the round. You're challenging the way they move their chess pieces. Either on the word choice they use, via topicality, or the conduct of the rules, right? So some other common procedurals are like conditionality, dispositionality, unconditionality. Have you heard these words? Okay, we'll go through them real fast. Condo. Condo, uncondo, dispo. And this stands for conditionality, unconditionality, dispositionality. So let's say I run a critique, and the team raises their hand and they say, what's the condition on the criticism? And you say, it's conditional. That means we may or may not go for it. We don't know. It's conditional. It depends on what you say. Unconditional means at the end of the round, we're going to go for the critique. We are unconditionally going for this argument, right? Dispositionality means it's up to you. If you make defense, then we might kick it. If you make offense, it's going to stick around, right? So those are the three different ways that people talk about these positions. The reason why these have weight is because we did a spending this out earlier, right? Spending money is probably really bad for the economy if it's deficit spending. And then we also did a cap hit, which just says capitalism sucks. Those two positions don't make sense together, do they? Not really, right? You can't spend money and then also say capitalism's terrible. Like those positions don't work on the same realm. Or saying like, you caused some really, really bad relations with China, and then get up there and critique the idea of China to begin with, right? Those positions are internally contradictory. They operate in different worlds. So teams tend to do conditional counterplans or conditional critiques to give themselves some outs, right? They'll run more than one position that contradicts one another, and they say these are conditional, and we don't care if they contradict, because our only job to do as the opposition is to negate your stock issues. We just have to prove you wrong. That's all we have to do. And so teams will run conditionalities bad, because how's the PM supposed to make any kind of strategic decisions? They don't know what the team's going for. It's really unfair, because what's the PM going to do? They're going to go for case at the end of the debate. And if the opposition team reads a topicality, two counterplans, and a critique, they don't know. They've got no idea what they're going to do at the end. And so that's why conditionality might be a bad thing. So like people would run interpretation. Counterplans must be unconditional. Violation, you just said conditionality. Standards, ground, you're a moving target. We can make arguments on one piece of paper that cap's good, and then you can cross-apply those on the other piece of paper that says you don't like the cap, right? Or on some spending dissat. That's really hard for an MG or a PM to do those kind of things. So an opposition team, you kind of want to understand, what you're going for. That's why really, from the get-go, you should understand this is what we're going to use to win, blah, 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 blah. Voters are the last thing, and there tends to be just three that people draw. One is called a priori. I can't even spell it. Fucking laughing. The other one is education, the other one is fairness. So a priori means, what is it, before? Prima facie means on face value, a priori means comes first. Mm-hmm. So this whole argument is, look, we're playing this game of chess, but you already fucked up, right? The way you're playing the game of chess is wrong, and that's bad for our education, and that's bad for our fairness, and because of that, the judge should vote them down. It doesn't matter if they win all of their impacts, it doesn't matter if they save 1,000 babies from burning, it doesn't matter, because you violated the rules, and you shouldn't win. These a priori things are things you always want to say on the bottom of any kind of procedural, right? Or if anybody ever says this is a priori, you want to deal with it. Because as a critic, what that means to me is this sheet of paper comes first. So let's say, you run a T and a critique, and you're winning the critique debate, but you're losing on the topicality debate. It doesn't matter about the K debate, because as a judge, and the language that's being used, a priori means this sheet of paper comes first. This debate must be resolved before anything else can happen. Before we can play the game of chess, we have to decide if what you just did was fundamentally wrong and why you should lose for it. And then the two under there people usually use is education and fairness, right? So what you're doing is uneducational, you're a moving target, we don't know exactly what you're saying, or your language choice is bad. And fairness, you didn't answer a question, that's unfair to us, we can't have a debate, fairness is the internal competition, blah, 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 blah. Cool. Is that everything good? Hopefully we're not just
Any questions so far? I know this is a lot of information. Is there something that makes sense?
Got a plan.
Get interested? Curious about something else?
Cool. Got a plan. You got a text. You have solvency. You have competitiveness. then you tend to have a net benefit. Am I missing anything, Maria? You texted.
It's my dad.
That's
With
okay.
me, I don't want
Am I missing anything? Like, honestly?
I don't think so.
Would you throw in mutually exclusivity? Is that something that's key on a counterpoint? What do you think?
Probably.
Yeah.
Explaining why they're
Competitive.
Yeah.
So I gotta probably split these up. Solvency, competitiveness. Jesus. Benefits. Cool. These are all the parts of a counterpoint. Text is really easy, right? They say the United States federal government should spend a whole bunch of money to go to the moon. You get up there and say, no, that China should spend. The People's Republic of China should spend the same amount of money to go to the moon. Solvency. Chinese space industry, hell of a lot better than the American space industry. NASA has no funding. Like, China wants to go to the moon. The US really doesn't. These are reasons why your counterplan, the text that you give, explains why you can get their advantages, right? So if their advantage is we get rare earth minerals off the moon, well, if China does it, then we still get rare earth minerals off the moon. Competitiveness is how these options, like how the counterplan and the plan can't be done at the same time, usually. And that's called mutually exclusivity. So this counterplan that we're talking about isn't mutually exclusive, right? Because the US could go to the moon and China could go to the moon at the same time. Right? Like, it's not competitive. It's functionally competitive, or it could be competitive via net benefits. So what teams do with the counterplan is they either have a net benefit that only the counterplan gets, or they run a disad that links to plan, to PMC. So like a very common disad to like China going to the moon would be space militarization, right? If we go to the moon, China's going to think that we're militarizing it, and if that's the case, they're going to put nukes in the atmosphere. So the way to get rid of that disad is to do let the Chinese do it, right? There's no opportunity cost because now there's no imperialist action because the U.S. isn't doing it. We solve better than they do, and competitively, if the U.S. still went, it would still link to this disad. They would still think that we're militarizing space. Other forms of like competitiveness is like mutually exclusivity. So an example would be like the United States federal government should substantially fund Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras' healthcare, right? Those three countries. A competitive counterplan, one that would be mutually exclusive, is to add another country or take one of those countries away. Or instead of funding their healthcare, get rid of their funding. Does that make sense? Because you can't give somebody money and take away their money at the same time. And so that makes it so that the judge can only choose between the plan and the counterplan. And that's this competitiveness, right? It's either mutually exclusive or there's an opportunity cost. Either there's a net benefit to the counterplan that the PMC doesn't get, or there's a disad that links to the PMC that the counterplan doesn't trigger. Cool? Sweet. Like, there's different types of counterplans. As an op, I mean, it really depends on what you like to do. I'm sure you've all heard some of these, like agent counterplans are cool. Time frame counterplans are abusive, but also cool. What else is an awesome counterplan? Consult is really abusive, but really cool. There's a lot of like counterplans. I'm not a big counterplan debater. I really like the critiques, but that's just me. So an example would be like the United States federal government should substantially reform its immigration policy, right? A consult counterplan would say the United States federal government should substantially reform its immigration policy by consulting Mexico. So you have to consult Mexico before you do the plan. And there's a disad too, right? You can't change immigration policy without talking to the other country. The plan itself doesn't talk to the other country. So there's a net benefit to consulting Mexico before we do the plan, right? Or let's say we're gonna legalize gay marriage, okay? And Obama's gonna speak at some conference in an hour and a half about gay marriage. You could run a time frame counterplan and say, yeah, we should legalize gay marriage, but in an hour and a half. Because it's going to be a conference, there's more weight, there's going to be a lot of people. If you just did it in his office with an executive order, there's no magnitude to that. But if you did it in front of thousands of people on a camera, there's probably some other net benefit to why that's good. Really, 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 really abusive, but you can see how that kind of like is a structure. It's something the opposition could do. And it all depends on like what you have access to or what information or what the topic is. But that's pretty much kind of what it's cool. Sweet. And then the last thing that Grace brought up is like on-case stuff. And I think these are really key. So All the stock issues, what we got: harms, inherency, solvency, plan, advantages. Yeah. So let's say, what was the topic we did earlier about nuclear weapons? The 3 delivery systems, right? So like a solvency deficit, they're going to say, look, we're solving nuclear war, we're getting rid of all these bombers, we're doing all these great things. And you would say, no, you don't solve, because you still allow for these other 2 types. Or the submarine program that you're eliminating is supposed to be redone in 2 years from now. So you get rid of some nukes on some ships, but in 2 years they come back. So your plan doesn't solve for what is going on. A lot of teams, and I think it's a really, really good opposition strategy, is to do no solvency, like a solvency dump. You just think 10 reasons why their plan could never do anything, like why it would never solve, and then read a topicality or procedural, like you overspecify or the word choice you used is wrong, and then run a critique. Because if their plan doesn't solve, and they waste a lot of time on some procedural, then all of a sudden your critique debate becomes really, really, really easy. So there's a lot of positions that jive very well together. Like a counterplan and a disad go hand in hand, right? They work and function with each other, and they need each other in order for them to work. Same thing with a solvency deficit and a critique, right? If the plan doesn't solve, then they can't claim that their advantages are ever going to work. And if there's a risk that the alternative solves, then the judge should vote for you, right? Because if there's, I think it's all about risk, offense, defense, right? So if there's absolutely no fucking way that their plan is going to get to the impacts that they're saying, then if there's a risk that your counter plan does it, or your critique might do it, then you should probably vote for that position. Does that make sense? Cool. That's everything. What time is it?
3:16.
So how much time we have left?
1 minute.
Oh, cool. Any questions? No? So just like, I know you've done this is probably a big rehash. So just some outside info or whatever. I would find some back files. If you're an op team or whatever, I think the best way to like strategize and do well as an opposition is to pre-prep your stuff, right? Think of things that you're really interested in and understand them in and out. I really enjoy energy topics because if it's AF, I'm going to run nuclear mocks. I have this case like memorized. I know exactly how it works. I know it in and out. If I'm on the opposition side and it's an energy topic, I'm probably going to run the Zizek criticism of ecology because I know it in and out, and it links no matter what, and my partner and I understand it, and we know exactly what we need to do from the get-go. So I think really good op teams pre-prep their stuff, right? Or at least they understand the topic in such a way that they can tailor their criticisms, they can tailor their counterplans to the topic in a very, very specific and contextual way. If you're looking for warrants, like, it's a stupid word they use for warrants. I really think a better word is empirics. Like, what's a historical example that proves your claim true? Right? And if you can, you don't need a huge explanation. You don't need some expert to say what you're saying. When borders are porous, violence occurs. Look at the border between Mexico and the United States, right? There's a lot of violence between there. That's a warrant that proves your claim true. And that takes 10 seconds to say, Mexico proves our claim. I'm trying to think outside of that. I would also put your ear to the ground to find out what other teams are running. So a lot of teams have pre-prep apps. If it's an energy topic and you're debating Oregon, they're probably going to run Windians. They're going to run wind energy on native reservations. If you understand that, then you can already pre-prep a natives K. You can criticize what they're going to talk about before they've even gotten there. You know what I'm saying? So if you really keep your ear to the ground for the tournaments, or you come back to your team and say, look, we just debated Whitman, and this is their politics disad, or this is their politics advantage, then as a team, you guys can really get on the same level, and you guys can pre-prep some arguments against it, because teams tend to recycle arguments at tournaments. Here's our politics disad, we're going to run every single round. And after one round, it's out, and everybody can get it. Outside of that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No? Come find me if you have any questions, after a round or anything. I'd love to chit-chat. I'd love to hear myself talk. So please. Yeah. That's true. I think I have a lovely